Now, you have heard that particular reading from the Gospel of Luke many, many times, and I'm sure most of you could almost read repeat it verbatim without looking at the text. So what really is the meaning of it? And just to, it's not a real story. It's what we call a mythical story. And unfortunately, we have given it a very bad interpretation, because that's where we get the idea of hell from and heaven. And so let's try in a couple of moments put it into what is really being said in the gospel this morning. It's the only time in a parable, where names are used. So we have the rich man, he is known as Dives, and Dives was the Latin word meaning rich. So they gave him that name. And then we have this poor man at the gate, and he's called Lazarus. So we have two names mentioned. So how do we interpret it in our own lives here now in the year 2021? Well, it's hard to explain. I have to say it's hard to explain it in a couple of moments here this morning. But Hades, or the place of the dead, was where in the time of Jesus believed everybody went when they died. They went to Hades. In other words, the abode of the dead, or the place of the dead. Now, in the gospel this morning, we have this wall, like, the wall that was built down at the border with Mexico. You have a big wall. And in the gospel, the good ones are on one side and the bad ones are on the other side. And so that's where we got the idea of heaven and hell. And that has done terrible damage to a lot of people. Now, when I look out here this morning and I see you, I needn't ask you, why have you come here this morning? And you've come here this morning because you want to be here, huh? Nobody forced you. There was no law saying, if you don't come to Mass this morning, you'll go to hell. But that wouldn't apply to many people who come or used to come before the pandemic began, and hopefully will come again. That does not apply to the many people who turn up on a Sunday. Because many people, and I experienced this in my own life, many people went to Mass because it was an evacuation plan for the next life. They thought, if I don't go to Mass, I'll commit a mortal sin and I'll end up in hell. And that's wrong. That is a very wrong interpretation of the gospel. Because we've got to remember that heaven, and if you want to use the word hell, is not about the afterlife. It begins here. And so we go back to the gospel this morning, and the question is, was the rich man happy? If you're rich and you're totally concerned with yourself and all your everyday activity and thoughts are all about me, 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 you're not a happy person. If you're living a life of sin and injustice and greed and avarice and all the other things, you're not a happy person. You're what we might say, you're living a life of hell. Hell begins here. On the other hand, if you're trying to live a decent life and you care for people and you love, you practice love in as much as you can, then that brings about a joy and a happiness in your life. So, as I've often said before, to repeat what Catherine of Siena said, and it's so true, it's heaven all the ways to heaven, and it's hell all the ways to hell. And it took me a long time to understand that. But thank God today I do. And if you're just living to the best of your ability, putting your best into every day, then you're alive. But if you're living, and I'm not saying any of you are, but people who live a bad life and are engaged in crime, they're already dead. They don't have real life in them. They're not enjoying life, certainly. They're continually looking over their shoulder in case they're caught. And that's the real meaning of the gospel this morning. And if you can get that into your head, that heaven and hell are not just what happens afterwards, but they begin here. Here. And that's why, to finish off, that Jesus said in the gospel, as a person lives, so shall they die. And that's very, very true. I've attended to many people dying, good people, and you can reach out and you can touch the peace. Just absolutely beautiful. Beautiful.